Hello everyone, DarkChiron here with another indie game first look, this time for Moonlighter. This one's going to be a little bit different than previous ones. I've actually already beaten the game, and I've recorded lots of footage for it, so this is going to be more of like a informed type review than my typical first looks where I just kind of do in first impressions of the game. If you like this format better, let me know. If you like the other format better, let me know, because I'm kind of playing around with how to do this. In any case, I bought this game myself. It was not given to me by the game developers, but I was very impressed with the game, so I decided I wanted to talk about it. The reason why I looked into it was because I think I'm saying this right. There's a game called is it Racketeer? I'll put it up on the screen. Anyway, an I Am Shop's Tale. I like that game quite a lot, and this game, just from the brief description of it, sounded a lot like that game. So, in the game, you play Will, the owner and proprietor of the Moonlighter, which is an item shop in a town that was built up as like a boom city around these dungeons. And the idea behind the dungeons was heroes would go down into the dungeons and slay monsters and come back with artifacts from other civilizations, and the town would sell those items to the rest of the world. And so there was a huge boom city built up around this whole idea. And the odd thing about the dungeons were that even if people went in, even if there were tons of people in there, no one would ever see each other, and everyone had their own experience about how the dungeon was laid out, what kind of monsters were in the dungeon, and what kind of things they would find in the dungeon. So it was very unusual. No one understood it, but they were all exploiting it. Well, the government decided at one point that it was far too dangerous for people to continue going in there. People would get lost and never come back. Even though people apparently would not die sometimes. They wouldn't die all the time. Sometimes they would quote unquote die and then get kicked out of the dungeon and be fine. But some people got lost and never came back out. So the government decided to close them all up, and the city basically fell off the map and became a ghost town because of that. Well, our dear friend Will decided that was all bullcrap, and he is as the game so cleverly titled it, a Moonlighter. He runs his item shop by day, and he plunges into the dungeons at night to get items to stock the item shop that he runs in the day. So I don't know when he sleeps, but he doesn't sleep very often. In any case, the whole game is based around you progressing throughout the game. There's 4 dungeons and an endgame dungeon, and you unlock each new dungeon as you beat the boss of the previous dungeon. And the game is built around as well unlocking improvements and upgrades to both the city and the shop. So as you unlock upgrades to the city, you're basically paying other business owners to come into the city and open a shop. And they sell you equipment and potions and item enchantments and things to upgrade your shop. And a guy who does business investments that I had never found out what the deal with that was, or the reasoning for it, which I'll get into later. But anyway, so you upgrade the town so that you can upgrade your equipment and your healing items for the dungeons. And as well, you upgrade your shop, and then when you upgrade your shop, you get access to more bench room to sell items in. You get access to new types of customers, like thieves, which are not great, but they're there. These aristocratic type people who seem like they will pay way more for items, but they will never tell you how they feel about it. And that's a big part of managing your store, is trying to get the right item costs figured out for how much an item should sell for, because the game lets you set your prices for everything. And based on customer reactions, you can determine if that price was good or not. Also, the game has, as far as I can tell, completely randomized booms and busts on certain items. Certain items will sometimes sell for way more than they should, and sometimes sell for way less. And the game is always very clear about if an item is in that particular situation. And the game also keeps track of what prices elicited what reactions from customers in the past, so that you can kind of you can kind of scale and adjust your prices as you need to be. So it's fairly interesting in that regard. I do like that system a lot. It's fairly simplistic, It's really straightforward, and once you get the prices down, it's really just a matter of keeping the shop open long enough to sell all of your stuff so that you get enough money to further upgrade the town, further upgrade your equipment, and pay for potions and item enchantments, all that stuff. As for the dungeons, it's also a fairly straightforward type situation. It's kind of almost like a dungeon crawling roguelike as far as the dungeons are concerned, because as I said, the maps are always randomized. The enemy placements are always randomized. There's a few pieces that are always there, such as healing fountains and campsites that you can find. But for the most part, the layouts are all randomized, and what you get off the monsters are randomized, all that stuff. So the combat, as far as that's concerned, is fairly straightforward. There are a lot of different types of creatures for every type of dungeon. The enemy variety is pretty good. Each enemy only has like 1 or 2 attacks. They don't have like a wide range of attacks and everything like that, but it is always a new experience every time you go to a new dungeon type, or even new levels in the same dungeon, when you find a new enemy and trying to figure out what is the best way to fight this particular enemy. You've got a myriad of weapons that you can choose from. I stuck to the sword and shield and the bow for the entirety of the game, because I found I tried the great sword and I think the pole arm. I didn't care for either of those, so I just basically stuck to the sword and shield they start you off with in the game. There's dodge rolls in the game, which gives you invulnerability. However, it doesn't work quite like it feels like it should. Because you can use this dodge roll to jump over pits, but if you try to jump over a similarly wide like stage hazard, like a poison area or a lava area, you'll actually just fall. You'll actually just roll right into the danger and end up taking damage from it, which is a little bit strange, but you get used to it as well eventually. As for story, this game actually has 2 kind of plot lines that you follow, outside of course, the plot of unlocking the dungeons. You'll find random notes throughout each of the dungeons that kind of seem like they're from the people who actually inhabit the dungeon. Now, you never actually see these people, and that's part of the storyline. Is why do you never see these people? They apparently don't see you either. But but they do tell a story of all of their stuff goes missing, and they don't know why. So it's kind of a weird mystery to solve as the game progresses. And there's also the story of Pete. Pete is another adventurer who was delving through the dungeons, who ended up actually dying in the dungeons. I think he doesn't die from and the monsters in the dungeon. I think he gets lost in there or trapped in there, and ends up just starving to death, I suppose. And I guess if you do that, it doesn't save you. You have to die to the monsters to get saved. But he wasn't allowed that luxury. So there's a secondary plot line of finding his notes and learning what happened to him, and some of the mysteries that he unlocked in some of the dungeons. Now, the mysteries that he talks about, I actually did not find in the game. I'm not sure why I didn't, but I didn't. So that's another. So even with me having beaten the game, I still don't know everything about the mysteries and the secrets of the game. Speaking of secrets, when you're traveling through the dungeons, one thing to keep an eye on is the pits. Now, I know it's fairly hard in some of the rooms to do that, because when you enter the room, the monster will come right at you. So it's kind of hard to not watch the monsters coming to kill you. But if you'll observe, with the first time you enter a room, sometimes one of the pits in the room will sparkle a little bit, and that means it's a secret. So you can jump into the pit. Usually that will hurt you, of course, but if it's one of these secret pits, when you jump down, you'll find a number of secrets. It could just be random items. It could be a challenge room where you have to fight waves of enemies, and the more waves of enemies you fight, you get a better reward. And sometimes there's this creature. He's an unkillable giant green slime monster who will try to eat all of the loot that gets dropped by enemies, and he will chase you until you leave that level of the dungeon. And he will also just show up on his own if you take too much time exploring a level in the dungeon. So I'm sure there's something about him. I think some of Pete's storyline involves that guy and ways to kill him or to do something with him, but like I said, I never found it. On top of that, I talked about loot. So like I said, the whole idea of this game is you go to the dungeons, kill enemies for loot, go back to your item shop and sell that loot to get money for upgrades. So the game works with that system really well because you have an incredibly limited inventory system, and everything in your backpack gets lost if you die. If you die in the dungeon, all of that gets dropped, but the top row of your inventory, which is like your personal belongings, I guess, I'm not sure how that's delineated, that stuff stays with you if you die, so you kind of want to keep your higher quality items up in that room. Also, when you open chests in the dungeons, because there are chests that have better loot than the monsters do, they'll have special modifiers on them. Some of them you won't know what the item is. Some of them will destroy an item that is in a slot next to it, so you have to be really careful with your positioning of those. And some items can only be placed in certain spots in your backpack. So, and some of them destroy that negative aspect of the item. So, for instance, if you had an item that can only be placed in a certain slot, these items would destroy that, so that you can now start placing the item anywhere you want it to. And sometimes, if you're super lucky, you'll find in the secret pit areas a chest where you can just dump your whole inventory in it, and it will teleport all those items back to your item shop for you, so that you can keep going and get a whole new backpack of items. And that's honestly the best kind of secret you can find, is the one that lets you dump your whole inventory back out, so you don't have to sell things. The game does have something system like that. If you do run out of inventory space and you need to get rid of stuff, you find a magnifying glass in there that will let you dump items into it for whatever reason, and the game will give you a small amount of gold for that. Now, if once your backpacks are full, how do you get out of the dungeon? Well, there's two ways. The first way that the game gives you initially is a pendant, and the pendant allows you to spend a certain amount of gold to just leave the dungeon, and you can do this whenever you want, even in the middle of combat. It takes a second to charge up, but it's a safe way to get out of the dungeon if you find yourself in a bad situation and don't want to lose all your items. The other way that you find a little bit later, I think in the first dungeon, like as you get to the bottom level of the first dungeon, is a cube that will actually open a doorway that stays open. So the pendant just shoots you out of the dungeon and then you're out. This cube actually creates a doorway to where you're at in the dungeon, so that you can start back up from where you're at. And of course, this option is for the bosses. Every dungeon is comprised of 3 levels and then the boss. So when you're on a boss run, typically what you would want to do is clear the first 3 levels, use the cube to teleport out when you're at the boss room, restock, refill your health, get all your items back, then go back in and fight the boss. The bosses are kind of sort of challenging. If you build right and are even slightly competent at the game, you can basically just face tank all the bosses. They're not. I'm not saying that they're a cakewalk, but they're not really hard either. Especially if you store up enough healing items and keep all of your equipment upgraded and enchanted. The Lost Boss is actually quite difficult. I won't tell you what his thing is, but he's actually a challenge. I found I died to him a couple times, just trying to figure out all of his attacks, because they are quite damaging, and you can't keep that many healing items on you. You do have a limit on how much healing items you can have in any one particular dungeon run, especially in the boss fight. So the game is fairly straightforward. It's fairly easy. I found it anyway. You'll die a couple times. Sometimes it'll happen, but there's no huge punishments. It's just time lost, basically, if you die. So there's no punishments to dying, really. So if you just want like a good, fun game that you can spend a couple hours on, this game is something I would recommend. Especially if you like the item management and the store running the store and doing these little dungeon runs things. That's very interesting. There are a couple of negatives, I would say, like I've mentioned once or twice. Everything is, there's not like a huge amount of depth to anything. It's all fairly straightforward and fairly simple. But like I said, it's still fairly enjoyable. The game is not a huge length. Also, I mentioned earlier that the banker business investment person, seemed kind of pointless, and that's because by the time that you get to unlock him, there's not really a reason to need to get that much gold. You do hit a point eventually where the stuff that you're getting in the dungeon sells for so much, and the cost for other things don't scale with that completely, that you'll have way more money than you possibly need, and you don't actually need some guy to like be like, here, take this money and double it in a couple days and give it back to me. There's no reason to do that. You just do the dungeons, get items from the dungeon and sell them. That's one thing which I guess I don't know if it's a positive or negative. It does have the positive of the game isn't a massive grind to get money, but also it makes it where you can kind of just go through everything fairly quickly, at least the way I did it. Maybe if you diversify more, there are like a variety of armor sets, and as I said earlier, there are a variety of weapon types. Maybe if you actually experiment more with different weapons and different armors, the game would take longer. But it didn't. I didn't do that, so so I kind of got through the game fairly quickly. Although, well, I say fairly quickly, but looking at my time played, I did take 13 hours to beat this game completely. And that is, as I said, doing things fairly, the items and the equipment that I used, I did take the time to fully enchant it all every single time I upgraded all the way each piece and all of that. So I did do some extra dungeon crawls to get the money to do that kind of stuff. But as I said, it didn't feel like it was a grind. It felt like just getting through the game. And if I knew more about how the game operated earlier, it wouldn't have taken me nearly that long to beat it. It probably would have taken under 10 if I actually knew what I was doing the whole time. But anyway, as I said, overall, it's a very fun game. I enjoyed it quite a lot. And if you want it on Steam, it runs for $20 US. I think it's a good purchase. I enjoyed it quite a lot, and I hope you guys do too. Anyway, in case I'm out of things to talk about, I thank you all for viewing, and I will see you all next time. Goodbye.